All right. Hello, yes, my name is Nolen Royalty, and I like to make unusual games. I'm going to tell you about one. So last year, I was using macOS Finder, the way that you look at files on Macs, and I noticed this date last opened timestamp, and that caught my eye. And it caught my eye because it reminded me of this thing called A-time, access time, a controversial file property on Linux. It's controversial because it tracks the last time that a file was accessed, but it's stored on the file system. So you update the file system every time you read from the file system. It slows things down a lot, and Linux kernel developers don't tend to like it. Keynote also wanted me to call it anime, which I thought was pretty funny. So I investigated the deal with date last opened, and what I found was that it changed when you double-clicked a thing in Finder, but it didn't change when I accessed that directory on the command line or when I renamed files inside it. I also found that with MDLS something something, it was programmatically accessible. And that all really excited me because I like to put games in weird places. So I'll show you what I mean. Let's make a button. Here's our plan. We're gonna write down the time that that directory was last opened. And then in a loop, we're gonna check when it was last opened. And if it's different, we're gonna do something. And then we're gonna update the time that we wrote down. We're gonna do this forever in a loop. That looks something like this. If you haven't seen Bash, don't write a lot of Bash. It's probably hard to read, but it's just an implementation of what I just described. And let's try that right now. So here's an example directory. I'm sorry, a little hard to read, but I'm gonna double click it. And you can maybe hear that it's saying you clicked the button. I can leave the directory, re-enter. Okay, cool. So that kind of works, but I have to like leave the directory and re-enter it every time I click that folder. That's not a very good button. We can do better. And what we can do here is use symlinks. So if you haven't seen a symlink before, it's like, you might know it as the name shortcut or alias. It's just a way to make a file somewhere that points at a file somewhere else. You click this file, you're actually clicking that file. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna put a symlink in that directory that points to the directory that it's in, so that when we double click it, nothing happens, but we update that timestamp. And that looks something like this. So here's our directory. Okay, and I can click this button. Nothing happens, but we're getting a response. We have built a button inside the file system. So we can take input. That's one of the things that we need for our game, but we also need output, right? What should we use for output? Well, I think that file names are a very reasonable thing to do. We're already dealing with file names, right? And so I started trying to figure out how I would draw the user a picture within the file system. And I was trying to come up with how to do ASCII art, but Finder's font isn't monospaced, and so that wasn't really working. And then I realized, wait, you can put emojis in file names, which is insane. I don't know why you can do that, but emojis, conveniently, are all the same width, and so it's much easier to draw with them. Thank you, whoever added that to macOS. So we have a form of input, just a single button that we can click. What's like an iconic game that kind of suits that form of input? Well, I think that Flappy Bird is actually a really good choice. If you haven't seen it before, Flappy Bird, you control this bird. It jumps when you tap. You try to not hit the pipes. That's it. It was a very popular, iconic game in the early mobile era. Pretty simple to program, and all you need is a single input, tap to flap. So finally, we need a function that goes from the state of our game at any one point to all of the file names that we want to draw to the screen. I'm not going to spend very much time on that because I just don't have enough time to go into it. One thing to call out is that we have to be careful to write those files in a consistent order so that they like appear to the user in a consistent order, since I'm sorting by date last modified. Fun stuff. But okay, recapping. What do? Well, we just fill a directory with symlinks pointing to their parent directory. We use emojis for their file names, and then we're gonna rename them to create movement normal stuff. And that gives us a game that looks like this. And like, that's a game, kinda. It's working, but like there are some problems here, right? We can do better. What are the problems? Well, there are two problems, or alternatively, there are infinite problems with doing something like this. But we're gonna talk about two problems. One of the problems is that we have limited timestamp fidelity. MDLS something something only gives us seconds. It doesn't give us milliseconds. And what that means is that we can't run it over 1 frame a second because you can't jump more than once a second. If you jumped twice in a second, we wouldn't update the timestamp the second time, right? And we want our players to be able to play our very playable game. So we need to do something about that. how do we fix it? I looked for all sorts of things and thought it'd be really convenient if we could detect file selection, detect you tapping the file. And I looked for different ways to do this. And eventually I stumbled upon AppleScript, which is a fever dream of programming language from the 90s. I love it so much. You talk to the computer. It is great. I love it. The one guy at Apple that still works on AppleScript emailed me about this project, which was a huge deal for me. And you can just say, hey, AppleScript, how many files are currently selected right now? And it'll tell you. And so our plan now is we're going to check how many files are selected. If the user has clicked, okay, or if they've selected a file, that means they've clicked. That means that we jump. We've got another problem though. Maybe you saw it. It's that our screen was tearing. That looks like this. That's one of the frames from the video. And what's going on there, this is kind of a common problem in graphical programming, is that we have old file names and new file names being displayed at the same time, which results in like the pipe at the bottom of the screen being torn. Finder isn't meant for this, which I know is a surprise to the audience, but we need to control when it refreshes those file names in some way. So what do we do? Well, I looked to kind of the techniques that people typically use to solve this and came up with double buffering. Double buffering is this really cool technique, common way of solving exactly this problem with real games. And the basic idea is we want to show all of those renames at the same time. So with double buffering, typically you have two buffers. Since our buffers are directories, we're going to have two directories. We display one directory, we rename all the files in another directory, and then we swap to displaying that directory all at once so that Finder never has a chance to show old and new stuff at the same time. So I tried all sorts of things for double buffering. One promising thing was using symlinks to swap out the contents of the directory atomically. That doesn't work because symlinks aren't expanded in Finder, so we can't do that. What do we do? What do we do? Well, it turns out AppleScript can do this too, because AppleScript can do everything. We love it. You can simply say, tell application Finder to set target of front Finder window to dir curbuff as POSIX file, normal stuff. And that will change which directory Finder is displaying. And that gives us a game that looks more like this. This is great, running at 2 frames a second, there's no more screen tearing. This is kind of cool. All right, we're gaming 2 frames a second, that's a lot of frames, right? But we can still do better. So let's recap our current setup. We've got a lot of symlinks, 22 symlinks pointing to their parent directory. In fact, we have 2 different parent directories, 2 sets of symlinks. In Python, we're shelling out to AppleScript to check whether a file is selected. Then we rename the files. And then in Python, we shell out to AppleScript again to do our double buffering. That's a lot of shelling out to AppleScript. And it turns out that AppleScript starts up too slowly for us. And I looked for all sorts of ways to fix this. I tried compiling my AppleScripts, which isn't really a thing, but it says it's a thing, all sorts of stuff. Polled my friends on what to do, and a friend suggested, can you just rewrite the whole game in AppleScript? And no, I'm actually not that crazy, but almost. We can get really close. What we can do is rewrite our game loop inside AppleScript, calling out to Python instead of the other way around. So to kind of walk you through that code, we wait for the user to start the game, asking them to double click, the first thing that we were doing, since that's a more forceful action. We record what time that is. We check the number of files selected within AppleScript. We pass that to Python. That tells us whether you're jumping. Python renames all of the files in our other directory, returns that to AppleScript, and then AppleScript navigates us to that new directory. And then we sleep to maintain a consistent frame rate, which just kind of makes things seem a little smoother since we only have a couple of frames a second. It's really obvious if one of those frames is twice as long as one of the others. Less of a problem if you're running at like 60 frames a second. So that gets us to 4 frames a second. That's double the previous number of frames. That's a 15th of what most games do. Which is kind of good. And then finally, to kind of close things out, I tried to add some flavor. I added scrolling banner ads across the top of the screen, which you can see. The one that you'll see tells you that you're the millionth visitor to this Finder window. Added documentation, some instructions, and then there's high score tracking in the bottom right. It's going to be really hard to see on this, but it does keep track across different games. And that gives us a full game that I'm going to try to play until I lose because I have a little bit of time. So here we go. I wish I could make this bigger, but I can't. I'm just going to double click to start. And the game's going to run. And I click, and I click, and oh, I died. Okay, it's a really hard game. It's not super playable. But that's it. That's what I've got. My name's Nolen Royalty. You can find my work at eieio.games. And thanks so much for having me. This was a joy to present.